Welcome to our webinar today. The CIO hot button of the year is application adoption. Wonder why? Best practices and new technology enable best-in-class companies. My name is Mike Zuckerman. I'm Knoa's Chief Marketing Officer and I'm your host today. Ilya Epstein, our Senior Director for Global Sales Engineering, will be managing our demo. And we're delighted and pleased that you could attend. Our session will be a maximum of about 45 minutes. And we'll try to emphasize hands-on view through the product and technology. I want to thank our global audience, which has now reached about 158 logged-in attendees. I think it's awesome that you guys could take time out of your schedule. Some of you are up very late or very early to attend, and we appreciate it much. We won't hold live questions for this event. Given the size of the audience, we're going to prefer that you send them to us, and we'll follow up through our sales team and support team. So, application adoption. Today we want to talk about the State of the Union. The State of the Union is pretty tough. We want to talk about the value of application adoption. Why is it so important and so valuable for customers to understand where they are and to start to improve and solve what you'll call that adoption gap? What are the best practices and the new technology that now uniquely enable your ability to close that gap? And I think that's really key, that so many of you have some of the latest infrastructure and systems, but in terms of really understanding application adoption and how to close the gap and the new tools that are available, most of the customers out there just don't have access to that information. And of course the demonstration and more. Please again email your questions. Very briefly on Knoa. Knoa technology has been licensed by 20% of the Fortune 50, actually 17 of the Fortune 100. We have hundreds of Global 5,000 licensees. And in the final analysis, application adoption is one of the core components of the bigger question. Are you realizing the full value of your enterprise application software investment? What does it take for you to realize best-in-class performance? And both of those are stepping stones to saving millions and millions of dollars, which is really what makes it all so powerful and compelling. Knoa Experience and Performance Manager is one of the latest user experience monitoring management tools and technology out there. We support the major enterprise applications that are critical for your ERP and CRM applications like SAP, Oracle's products like Siebel and PeopleSoft, Salesforce, and more. All of it is about ultimately understanding performance at the desktop, both for the things that you deliver as services to the user and for the user themselves. And we have differentiated architecture and automation and things that we do that are unique, that have positioned us to gather these customers and drive the market from a very early start to where it is today. So that aside, I know you'll be able to find information on our customers, just many customers, 17 of the Fortune 100, the top pharmas, many customers just like you, and we'll cover that offline. We'll dive into our webinar. So first we need to understand exactly what application adoption means to all of us, right? So application adoption is the process that brings products out into your employee base and then brings them into production, and then manages that production and optimizes performance. So even before you roll the release out, application adoption should be concerned with how well does it work, how prepared are we to do this. You're also wanting to understand how the process is going in terms of specific execution. Every time you iterate an application, every time you iterate that application, you will find that some things will get better and some things will get worse. And our data tells us, in fact, based upon many dozens of customers that were scrutinized closely, that customized transactions that you have in your enterprise with the best of intentions often pave the road to the biggest application adoption problems. And with Knoa, you'll be able to understand that. And then finally, once you're understanding how to reach best in class within your own organization, you want to start to understand, how do I reach best in class for everyone that's like me in life sciences, or everyone in manufacturing, or everyone in banking and finance? And that's really the holy grail, because your organization is then performing better, producing more money in terms of operating profit, and driving the business better and more efficiently. You move from an IT-centric issue to an enterprise-wide CEO visible issue. That's how powerful the savings and performance benefits can be. So what is the adoption gap? Well, there's really two tiers. And I can tell you that today, 95% of the largest companies in the world have mostly respectfully submitted no quantitative view of what these things are. They really don't. The first gap we call the super user adoption gap. You don't have to look outside your enterprise to now have visibility to how are your users performing, end-to-end, systems and their hands-on ability. How are they performing? And you will find there are some users that do more transactions, transactions faster, transactions with less user errors, right? New visibility to new data, than the bulk of your enterprise. And then you will find there's 10 to 20% that by far are having the most challenges, either because they're new, or perhaps there are other reasons particular to their installation that you may not know. You may wonder why the Des Moines office is not performing like everyone else, and it may be that there's network and performance problems that were invisible until you were able to adopt a product like user experience monitoring and see the performance of the desktop. So super users are about comparing your best and brightest with the rest of your organization, and then closing that gap and moving people up the tiers. There's tremendous return on investment to do that. Enterprise adoption gap now is, looking out across your peers and working with Knoa to understand what's possible. Now, for many vanilla transactions that come out of these application systems, that comparison is readily available. Most of you, if I said order to cash, have different definitions of those things. But within industries, those definitions look more alike than not. So this enterprise adoption gap can be worked on. And less than 1% of the companies out there today really have quantitative or qualitative data about this and really have no plan to action it to a better state and frame of execution. So ultimately, it's about time and error, eliminating it, being more efficient at business process, and driving more value to the bottom line. Application adoption is a hot button for CIOs because once they get a sense of the gap, they can start to see how much money is being lost. It's a huge issue. 5% to maybe 10%, and we're being really liberal because if our statistic is wrong, it hurts us. So we're grotesquely erring on the side of large S, but I think the number is much lower. And most people just can't measure this, have no clue. And those that can measure it are saving millions and millions of dollars because now they have a metric they can iterate and resolve. One of our best-in-class leaders is a major healthcare firm, a leading pharmaceutical player. And this technology has become the basis of a CIO pet project, which they will talk about, but they won't share too many details on. I can tell you that they've told me conversationally that they will save something like $9 to $10 million in 2013, and that goes from becoming a nice-to-have project to something that is impacting the organization in a major and strategic and compelling way. Part of what you need to think about, right, is that if you know how your users are performing, and you have all this new data that we share with you about user error, and you're merging that with your other BPM data, which is critical. We don't have the whole solution, but we have a cornerstone of what you need. What you see is there are groups or transactions or people or places, all of this analytics in Knoa. Knoa is a big analytics framework that tells you where the problems are. And now it points to things, whether it be by geography, by user, by transaction, by screen, by business process, whatever metrics we slice and dice, right? And says, here's how much error we have. Here's how fast they are. And if you could say, identify all of the error globally that your accounting department is experiencing in trying to fulfill certain order-to-cash transactions, you can now say, based upon that user suffering for 43 seconds with an error because they didn't know how to execute business process, times their hourly salary rate, this is what the organization, this is our lost business productivity in this 8-hour period today. And for those of you with 500, 1,000, thousands, tens of thousands of users, these numbers are massive. And this is the only technology that even gives you visibility to this. Without a agent-based user experience management product, you can't even begin to look at these application adoption issues. You just won't understand how much time is being lost to these errors, and it's monstrous and it's massive, and it becomes compelling for you to understand it and resolve it. Most companies are on autopilot, and it's sort of like paying an electric bill in an old house without insulation. You pay it because that's where you live, that's what you've got to do, and there's a lot of inertia around it. And the same thing for IT in the line of business. There's a lot of problems that we just pay for. And this data not only can impact application adoption in a tremendous way, this data becomes self-evident in other problems that it can solve, problems that your organization has on autopilot. Your IT service desk, for example, can save 10 to 20% just by adopting this technology. When users call the desk, the interrogation is pretty much over. They can see exactly what you did, exactly what errors you experienced, exactly what your workflow was. So this technology, aside from today's topic of application adoption, can drive benefits across a variety of departments and pain points. And for those, we build a bunch of different solution sets we'll share with you today. So let's take a look at this differently. Let's sort of open the thought process to understand what this technology will do. And let's ask two questions. What is the average percentage of system error that your entire production environment has for your major app? Let's pick the major apps that count. It could be SAP, it could be Oracle, Siebel, or PeopleSoft, or something. It could be Salesforce, right? You have 2,000, 3,000, 10,000 users on it. What's the system error that they experience in a day? And you need to know how much time that's impacting in terms of productivity. The next question's far more subtle and far more difficult to answer. Well, by the way, what's the percentage of time for user error KPI in your production environment? The average CIO, he or she will look at you and with confidence say, well, we get a lot of reports from our APM tools. Here's our system error. And a lot of these alerts and things we ignore, but we know there's some real error in there that's impacting people. It takes a little work to figure it out. And for our user error, well, we have metrics from our help desk. We know what people tell us, and we can kind of guess at what that might be. And nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that if you could measure user error, which we can, and you could measure system error, you would see the data that we've gathered from best-in-class companies even before we started to use our tools there. And on average, of the total error mix in an enterprise, only 8.4% are system errors that are felt at the application level, impacting application performance. That's mind-boggling, because now the CIO and the line of business exec and the CEO can see that 91% of my performance issues by count are just caused by business process error. And that business process error is exactly part of the application adoption problem. It relates to many other pain points like change management. 91% of your errors are about your user's performance. It ties back to training and remediation and user performance. So this is a big wake-up call. Every time we install, we share this data with a CIO. They have never seen this data before. And the implications of this are fairly substantial for application adoption. So now we have data that enables best practice to change the view. So now we can start to look down the road. We can start to assess the economic value of these gaps, and we can take concrete steps to shrink the gaps. The first best practice, I think, is that this technology is not something you're going to want to deploy across 2,000 apps. Every major enterprise, we get into needs assessment, and there's someone in IT that will know exactly how many applications are out there, based upon last reporting. And the number for a major enterprise is usually 2,000 to 8,000, 9,000, something like that. Most of them are used infrequently by 1 or 2 or 3 people. You want to find the 5 to 10 that drive, mission critical ERP and CRM. Those are the biggies, right? It's SAP, it's Oracle, it's Salesforce. And those are the ones where your qualified user, we have this notion of a qualified user, is someone who is executing mission-critical mainstream enterprise apps. They're spending hours on it a day. It's part of their mainstream position description, and they use a prescribed workflow defined by company business process. So your CRM reps have to use the Salesforce Service Cloud, or they have to use Siebel. Your HR department has to use this PeopleSoft software and execute their transactions this way, and that's the big ROI for you. I kind of think of it as the big iron of your data center in your cloud, and those are the things that are still going to drive the best performance for you. Best practice number 2 is to start out now taking this new technology and now just understanding where you are. You can't measure a gap until you measure one side of it. You need to know where you are, and you need to look at the data. The analytics presents this data automatically and highlights areas of opportunity, and you can start to spin this data and start to look at it differently and start to derive all of the areas of opportunity. Who are your super users? How are they performing? How are your groups performing globally? Why is the Chicago office on order to cash 22% slower? Let's understand where that problem is, screen by screen, module by module. It's all there, right? And so you'll start to have a lot of revelation just by looking at where you are. Then you can start to really define this adoption gap now. I really want to know, I want to define my best practice super user. And now, as a project plan, I want to take my mainstream users, let alone my challenged users, and as a goal, over time, I want to move them up X%. And you can extrapolate the dollar values. I mean, the worst case is you can see X users times X time with errors, and you can assign a weighted hourly rate to it. And you will be presenting data to your CIO or your executives that they have never seen before. And as a soft cost, people work on Six Sigma processes and all sorts of stuff to scrape 0.5% off the floor. You're going to show them a much larger capability for savings. And these are the things that application adoption will bring. Best practice number 4 now is to start to profile performance and pick your targets of opportunity. Our system shares all of them with you, right? It just tells you, it sets them all up. It will even set up alerts. If there's a specific thing that's too slow or too problematic, or if we have a new user error that's bigger than this or broader than this, give us an alert. But now you want to pick the targets, and you want to take the steps to remediate them. And profiling performance is part of that user gap process, where you're really trying to see who's doing well, who isn't, and then where are the areas of opportunity in that execution, right down to the screen or button or process that's causing problems, and right down to those custom transactions that you designed with tremendously good intentions that are unfortunately creating havoc and actually got worse since the new release you pushed to the field. Respectfully submitted, we'll all see that a lot, but now we'll be able to remediate it perhaps early on in the change management process to optimize our application adoption. Best practice number 5 is, now that you've got your targets, you need to execute known remediation paths. A lot of this business process issue is about looking at the training and self-help portal components that you have, and training and related HR capabilities are the unsung heroes for your remediation programs, because now before you knew that you had to train people and you had to do a bunch of things, but you didn't understand where the problems are. Now you know exactly where the problems are globally, 24 hours a day, whether they're reported or not, and you can see the economic impact. And when you wake up the next morning, you will know that training and education is a much larger opportunity than we ever knew it would be. And that's the other big revelation that comes through. So there's a lot to do here. Best practice number 6 now is to constantly manage back your baseline to current state and to measure your adoption and to measure your user performance and to tie this into data from your BPM tools. And what you will now have is the ultimate CIO dashboard. So think about it. For line of business or for the CIO, you walk into a meeting, the most senior meeting your executive team has in your multi-billion-dollar company, and the CIO is there. The VP general managers from the big business units are there, right? And the CIO and the CEO have a dialogue on the new release. We just pushed a new release out. How is it going? And normally the line of business has frustrations, right? There are problems, but it's anecdotal. We know that only 1 in 8 get reported to the help desk. The CIO or the Center of Excellence or whoever is using this tool to drive application adoption can say, we know that there have been 4,000 user errors over the last 24 hours, of which 700 were reported. And we know that they're in these areas, and we are prioritizing remediation against these top 5 targets this week. And we know that the economic cost of these problems is X, and we're going to try to drive back Y from that amount back to our bottom line and back to our operating efficiency. Nobody can do that today, but with this technology you can. And it changes the view for your organization to one of a high-value strategic component. And that ultimately is the value of application adoption. It is a high-value strategic component that affects the very fiber and core of the enterprise ability to earn profit. You know, it's really simple. We talked about it before. We connect to everything automatically, every transaction, customized or not, every function at the most small and discrete level. The analytics automatically discovers opportunity and displays it for you by solution set. And then you can manage and measure your success at remediation. To look at it differently, you're really sort of feeling your way through the user business process and execution from the desktop point of view. And then we're presenting this data back in dashboards where you can click and drill down. We're using standard BI components, but we've built in analytics, which is the ability to navigate up and down and left and right so that you can really drill into any given area. And of course, taking action is the thing that you do to bring the circle full around and to improve all of those metrics as you can. There's a lot to talk about in the product, but I'd like you to see it and get a sense of what it does. You'll see that in a few moments. And in the final analysis, these are the reasons that customers do this. So we get a typical call after this event and someone says, well, I really want to do this, but we don't have a budget till 2015, right? We don't have a budget. Most of our customers that purchased last year, and we have some huge brand names that purchased last year, did not have a budget for this technology. We sat down, we did a needs assessment, and we built a value engineering analysis, a return on investment analysis with a super conservative view and then an optimistic view. And most of the customers that cared about this analysis and spent time on it were able to see, you know, millions of dollars in savings over a 3 to 5 year system life. That's why people do this. So CIO and line of business will stand up and say, look, we need to fund this business case because we think we can get to break even on this thing in 9 or 12 months, and this is going to be beneficial for the whole organization. And what happens is that, you know, people make room and find the expenditure. So that's the kind of project this is, and these are the expectations you should have. If you sit down with us and you don't see these sorts of numbers, right, if you don't see a payback for your scenario in 9 to 15 months, then you shouldn't do it. And most of our customers, a great bulk of them, have been driven by this ROI. So with that, I'm going to turn the session over to Ilya Epstein. I want to thank you for your attendance today, and now we'll move on to the demonstration.
Thank you, Mike. That was excellent. So today we're going to take a look at some of the best practices around application adoption. The first thing we're going to take a look at is the ability of the Knoa agent that resides on the desktop to be able to monitor all of your key enterprise applications. This could be your SAP ERP system, it could be your Siebel CRM application, Salesforce, your BI tools such as OBIE or Business adoption metric, it's not just the amount of time people are logging into the application, but it's a true measurement of adoption. It's a true active time. By that, what I mean is, if the user has logged into the application but is not using it, or he has changed focus, or he has stepped away from his desk, we're able to detect it. So this is a true measurement of adoption that can only come from an agent that resides on the user's desktop. Other systems, such as back-end monitoring, can provide you a login time to an application, but as we know, that can never be used as a objective way to measure adoption, because very often users log into the application, they'll open up Salesforce, but they actually spend most of their day in Excel or in other processes. So Knoa solution, because it's an agent technology, is the only one that can give you that true measurement of adoption. Now, also, because it's an agent on the desktop, we don't just stop on the application level. Not only do we tell you how much time you spend within the application, but we can actually go deep. We can actually go on a module level. Module could be a transaction, a C code, or a C code within an SAP ERP application. It could be a specific tab or a component within Salesforce, like account management or lead management, and so forth. So every application that we monitor, we're able to break it down specifically by the individual component that users are executing in within that application. If we go even deeper than that, we could even go on a screen level. So we could actually tell you which specific screen within which specific application or process, where are the users spending most of their time. And that's extremely important for many reasons, because whether it's from a process compliance perspective, making sure that the users are leveraging the right screen, so the right steps when they're executing a transaction or a process, or whether it's from prioritization of support activities, right? When is it time to sunset something that is not being used? Or how do I prioritize my testing or regression or upgrade schedule if I don't have a true measurement of adoption and a true measurement of what's really important and critical to my business? Now, the second thing we want to take a look at is, you don't want to be just looking at these metrics in a subjective way, how much time people are spending within an application. As Mike pointed out, the power of analytics really, shines when you start looking at things like peer-to-peer analysis. When you're looking at the users that belong to the same cluster or to the same functional area across different types of attributes, such as size, such as location, or their role. When you start looking at the Knoa analytics from that perspective, you get an incredible view in terms of how am I doing, how are the users doing versus their best in class, how are they doing versus their peers. So for example, here if I'm looking at a specific process like account management within Salesforce, I'm able to break it down and see, why are some locations are using it as it was intended, where some locations below here are barely using that application at all. And you can do this based on any attribute set. It could be department, manager, role. All of this information could come from Active Directory. You could also import it from other sources if you have an HR system. All of this can be brought into the Knoa solution, and instantaneously you get a new level of analytics that helps measure the adoption of your application. The next thing I want to talk about is trend analysis and automatic baselining. Because as Mike talked about, because we're monitoring all these users all the time, we have the incredible capability to be able to develop automatic baselines. So for any process, any screen, any module within your application, you can tell exactly how many users are active on any given day. That's represented by the blue line and the blue graph. So you can very quickly see here that you actually have a major variation in adoption, right? You had users baselining at about a 10% adoption rate for that specific application, and it's dropping down. But what's also great is, because we have this historical baseline, we can actually plot in this black line what the projected adoption rate should be based on your historical usage. And you could do this historical analysis based on the previous month, based on a previous quarter, even for cyclical transactions or cyclical processes, something that is only executed once a quarter or once every actually measuring the true active time that the users are spending within each process. The next part of the demo, we want to talk about, what are some of the challenges, what are some of the causes that could cause a diminished adoption gap. For this purpose, we're going to take a look at a business process KPI dashboard. This actually illustrates another great point in that all of the metrics that Knoa collects, you do not need to be looking at it only from a transaction or a screen perspective, but for business users, especially for CFOs or CIOs, you could be looking at it from a business process perspective. And this is very important because a lot of times you want to understand the adoption gap as it impacts your organization. You need to look at it from a business process perspective and understand the business processes that are really driving your business, which ones are more critical, which ones are impacting your bottom line, and so forth. So the Knoa solution allows you to actually import your business process map into the product so that when we're looking at this active time and looking at the variation of activity between two periods, here we're looking at the first 2 weeks of April versus the last 2 weeks of April, and we're definitely seeing a major drop in adoption. We could see it based on all of your processes, whether it's from sales processes like sales orders and activities, to material management, to financial accounting, and so forth. So now we're seeing here definitely a major drop in adoption across all of these business processes. What could be some of the reasons why this is happening? That's where the other metrics that Knoa monitors come in place. For example, the response time of the system. The Knoa solution is actually able to measure a true response time from an end user perspective, and this is an end-to-end response time. By that, what we mean is from the moment the user clicks on any control within an application, or whether it's a button or whether it's a link, until that application processes that request, returns data to the desktop, and renders it so that the user could go to the next step, that's the Knoa cumulative end-to-end response time. And that's, again, only possible with an agent-based technology on the desktop. Other solutions like APM tools will give you a response time from your database server, from your system, maybe from your network, but they don't really tell you what is truly happening on the user's desktop from a user perspective. So, for example, here we're seeing a drop in adoption, and we're seeing an increase in response time across all of these business processes. And let's assume that this was there was a change that actually occurred here, right? We're measuring a month, 2 weeks versus 2 weeks. for financial accounting, we're actually going to be able to see what are the different components that make up the financial accounting. Here we can see that it's actually 10 separate processes, 10 separate transactions that constitute the overall financial accounting process. And we see here that we have an increase in user errors. Now, what's also interesting, using the heat map, you can actually see an incredible picture here. The size of the box represents the active time. So you can see that most of the users are spending their time in this FDL 5N transaction. And that's probably, without Knoa, that's probably where you would spend your time if you were tasked with optimization of financial accounting. You would look and see, maybe do a survey, find out where the users are spending their time, and try to maybe do some optimization of that process, maybe spend more time in training, maybe put key users and super users, maybe do redesign of the screens to make sure that the process moves faster. But with the Knoa solution, we actually pinpoint based on the intensity of the color here. You can see that most of the user errors are actually happening in F22 transactions. And again, almost entirely user errors, not system errors. Not only that, but within that transaction, you can see that most of the user errors are happening on this one specific screen. So if I want to go ahead and optimize this financial accounting business process, instead of spending my time in all of the other components of this process, Knoa was able to pinpoint where you need to focus on. Maybe I need to redesign the screen. Maybe I need to create better a training program. Maybe I need to think about optimizing the flow of the process in my center of excellence and so forth. And then ultimately, Knoa also brings it down to a user perspective. In this case, actually, you can see that the major problem in this transaction is not across all users. Not all users are being impacted the same way. It's actually just a single user that is responsible for 90% of all the errors. So in this case, remediation is very clear. You just need to focus on this end user and make sure that you can improve that process and improve the transaction and the process overall. So this is the key areas that we wanted to talk about. We wanted to look at application adoption and also some of the factors that could be impacting the lack of targeted adoption rates, which include poor application response time, as well as various errors within the application. There's a lot more. We'll gladly schedule follow-up demos with all